Welcome to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our first Humanities in the Wild event for fiscal year 2025 for the Utah Humanities and the end of 2024. So I just want to say thank you to all of our guests. I'm Case Johnston. I'm manager for the Utah Center for the Book and Utah's affiliate to the Library of Congress. And I'm really excited for this virtual Humanities in the Wild today. Thank you, Michael and Stephen and everybody for being here, for putting it together and having all these great voices in one place. So really quickly, just as some kind of housekeeping stuff, if you have questions, we're hopefully going to get to audience questions at about 6:45. If you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A section, not in the chat. If they get in the chat, they'll probably just get lost, and I'll be monitoring those questions throughout the next 45 minutes. That said, as a fair warning, there's a lot of knowledge in this room, and if we are organically just chatting at 6:45 and we are flowing, we may not get to questions. So that all depends on how we move through the next 45 minutes, which, like I said to our panelists before this, there is no shortness of knowledge in this room, and I doubt that we'll have any shortness of content. But welcome everybody. I'm going to give really quick intros, then I'm going to hand it over to Stephen Trimble, who's going to moderate for the most part this discussion tonight. So first off, Stephen Trimble has been a freelance writer and photographer since the 1970s, when he worked as a park ranger in Colorado and Utah. The breadth of his awards mirrors the wide embrace of his work: the Sierra Club's Ansel Adams Award for Photography and Conservation, the National Cowboy Museum's Western Heritage Wrangler Award, and a Doctor of Humane Letters for his alma mater, Colorado College, honoring his efforts to increase our understanding of Western landscapes and peoples. See, that's going to be the extent of my bio for Stephen, because again, with this group, if we did full bios, that might take us to that 45 minute mark because of all the accomplishments tonight. Rebecca Lawton is an author, a fluvial geologist. Did I get that right, Rebecca?
Yep.
Former Grand Canyon River guide and survivor. She lives and writes on an ephemeral stream in Northern California Steelhead Country at the foot of the mountains walked forever by Miwok and Pomo indigenous tribes. Visit her at beccalawton.com. Zak Podmore is an award-winning author and journalist who has spent more than a decade writing about water and conservation issues in the Western United States. He is the author of 2 books published by Torrey House Press: Confluence, Navigating the Personal Political on the Rivers of the New West, and Life After Deadpool, Lake Powell's Last Days and the Rebirth of the Colorado River. Brooke Williams writes about evolution, consciousness, and his own adventures exploring both the inner and outer wilderness. He believes that the length of the past equals the length of the future. His latest book, Encountering Dragonfly: Notes on the Practice of Reenchantment, will be published in April 2025. He and the writer Terry Tempest Williams live with 2 cats near Moab, Utah, where they watch the light and wait for rain. Michael Engelhard is the author, most recently, of the National Book Award-winning memoir Arctic Traverse and the Grand Canyon essay collection No Walk in the Park. His work has also appeared in publications like Sierra Outside Audubon, Backpacker National Parks, and Times Literary Supplements. This video, tonight's webinar, will be available on Utah Humanities YouTube early next week. With that, in the YouTube notes, we have links to all of these books by all of these authors, as well as their websites, where you can check them out, buy their books, buy independently, and explore more of what they have to say from this webinar through the written word. So with that, I want to invite Stephen to jump in and get the conversation started. Thanks.
I think I can do that. So thank you so much, Case. Thanks for those lovely introductions. And thanks to all of you on the screen and all of you watching at home. That sounds somehow like I'm a TV host, but it feels a little bit like that. So here we are on the screen. All of us on the screen here write about journeys, river trips, long walkabouts, hikes, traverses, and road trips. As Barry Lopez said, I am a writer who travels. That's the way he summed up his approach to the world. The writer Tai Selassie says, my experience is where I'm from. All identity is experience. Becca writes in The Oasis this time, At heart, we're all just visiting. So I want to ask each of you to introduce yourself by telling us where you feel like a local. How do you define your home? How do your feelings about home inform your writing? And I think that's a great way to get us started and let everyone know a little bit about where we're all coming from. Becca, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Case and Utah Humanities. And it's great to be in the room with you guys for the first time. This is amazing place to meet. And thank you for the quotes from Barry and from the Selassie quote as well. And for quoting me from Oasis this time. You know, I was thinking when I wrote at heart, we're all visitors, or we're all visiting, that not necessarily in our own hearts, but in the heart of the matter is that we're here for a short time. And the impermanence of our being here makes it all the more beautiful, of course. But I don't think we feel like visitors. I know that when I'm feeling at home, which is really on the water, I feel like it owns me or I own it, that there's no way I'm just visiting here. And so that's what I was thinking when I wrote about that. And I quoted the On the Loose and the quote about the, in fact, I was going to read that here from The Oasis this time. At heart, we're all visiting. The land and water can be interpreted fresh every time, but we're still just responding. In their 1967 classic On the Loose, Rennie and Terry Russell described the canyons and rivers that had claimed their souls. Nature might have made sphinxes in her spare time, or Mona Lisa with her left hand, blindfolded. After the first artist, only the copyist. So we copy the first artist, and the first artist is where we write from. So on the water for me, if I'm standing next to a stream, I'm picking out my route every time. Where am I going? Where is this carrying me? How can I best be positioned for it? And so I think that's as specific as I can get about where I'm at home.
Brooke, you want to go next?
Sure. My home is Castle Valley, Utah. One of 11 collapsed salt domes in the area. I think all the time, did it collapse all at once? And I think of the wonder about the noise and the dust, or over millennia. I still don't know. I don't know who knows. We've been there 25 years, over which I've watched our home and the surrounding area become more of an imaginal landscape. In fact, for most of my life, I've loved exploring the outer reality, finding different wild places, deep canyons and high mountains, high adventure, very physical. But the older I get, the worse my knees get, the imaginal world becomes more practical. The same 6 or 8 pathways, which through one eye don't change, but through the other get deeper and more complex depending on what I need from them. My home world is a vast circle, our house in the center, different dimensions spoken out. One to the northeast drops into a deep arroyo, which guides autumn floods around our house, and I walk up the other side. I discovered this following a coyote during a dream. I chased him across the flats where farmers once grew alfalfa, through the sage into the main wash and through the portal, which most everyone else thinks is a culvert. But how could it be? An entirely different world exists on the other side. And besides, the coyote runs on all 4 legs until he reaches the portal and passes through it, and then he's upright. I followed him up a tight wash into the cave where we talked. I went there a number of times, learning new methods, asking new questions. And each time I left, he gave me a bag of his shit to deal with. Then one day, a huge rainstorm had flooded the area and washed away the back of that cave, which obviously was no longer a cave. But the space between the legs of a giant Pleistocene bison, which I wonder about each time I go there. Sometimes I head over the pass into the very vast wilderness. Peter and Anne live over there, and sometimes I stop in for dinner. Other times I head south, following the deer pass into a different wash, which near the bottom flows around Queen, the erotic juniper. She's a very old juniper. She's laying back, her legs bent and spread, and if you stand behind her, you can see why she's called the erotic juniper, because they're rising up between her legs, and the distance is the 300-foot ballast that most think is Castleton Tower. From there, I cross back into ordinary reality and go to the pond where usually in the summer and fall anyway I stop to watch dragonflies. One day I saw 8 different species there. And from there, if I hurry, I can be back home in 20 minutes.
Zach.
Oh, those are some good answers here. Yeah, thanks everyone. Great to be on the panel with these folks. I've lucky enough to have read a book from each of these authors, and some multiple books. And if you haven't checked out any of their work, you definitely should. It's a great group we've got together tonight. Where do I feel at home? I mean, as a displaced European American, it's not as easy of a question to answer as it is for some people with deep ancestral ties to a place or a landscape. But I remember doing a raft trip down Westwater on the Colorado River a long time ago with Stephen Trimble. And I was a big Stephen Trimble fan. I've been writing him fan mail. Embarrassing fan mail, I'm sure, when I was 20 years old. And we were talking about I grew up in Western Colorado. We were talking about where people tend to move who are tied to the Colorado Plateau, as I've certainly felt at that time and still feel today. And Stephen said, there's not most people who didn't grow up on the Colorado Plateau don't actually live on the Colorado Plateau. They live in the cities or towns surrounding it and make a lot of trips there. And I feel very lucky to have ended up by happenstance, more or less, on the Colorado Plateau in Bluff, Utah, over 10 years ago. And it's like Brooke's saying, it's the journeys that start out the front door are definitely how the landscape is tied together and becomes home for me. And like Becca said, I feel most at home on the rivers, and I definitely think about my home and my place in Bluff along the San Juan River as part of the watershed that feeds down into the Colorado River and Lake Powell and connects upstream to Glenwood Springs, Colorado, where I grew up. And that's been where I've spent most of my time working and exploring and writing, and it's been the subject of both of my books from Torrey House Press. So the rivers that cut through the Colorado Plateau are definitely where I feel most at home.
And Michael.
I consider myself very fortunate that I, in my life, have not just found one place that is a spiritual home, but actually 2 places or regions. One of them being the canyon country of southern Utah and northern Arizona, and the second one being Arctic Alaska. On the downside, that has led me to live a pretty unsettled life, unsustainable for sure. And I just recently relocated to Moab, Utah again after an absence of 20 years, which felt like a nice closing of the circle because Moab is actually where I became a writer in the first place. I lost my train of thought here. The two places, the two regions that I feel spiritually at home in, they are just like Russian dolls. They are the gifts that keep on giving. They're stories within stories within stories. And that's one of the reasons why I became a nonfiction writer and not a novelist, because there are all these amazing stories that the land provides, if you pay attention, that need to be told, that have never been told, or that can be retold from a new angle. And juniper has already been mentioned here. As Edward Abbey said, you could spend a whole book just writing a life history of one juniper. On the downside, you labor when you tie to these places real intimately. You, for one thing, the more places you love, the more often your heart will get broken. And secondly, as I'm sure the other panelists will have experienced to one degree or another, you always labor under the label of regional writer, which, you know, you take a look at the New York Times book review, and of the nonfiction titles that are being reviewed there, try and see how many you can find that actually are place-based, coming from a regional perspective. But for me, the regional perspective is really the crucial one, because another Abbey quote, "Go let the nation state hang itself." I think a lot of our troubles these days originate from the fact that we do not think, like Elder Leopold said, like a mountain, and we also do not think, like Rebecca mentioned earlier, in water, and Zak mentioned, in water, in the terms of watersheds. But this is really where the crucial thinking takes place, because for me as a writer and also as a human being, I cannot talk about developments like the climate breakdown or development in the backcountry in an abstract frame of reference. I have to use the places that I know, that I'm intimately familiar with, and that I have a long-term perspective on to talk about these issues.
Thanks to y'all. I'll tell you briefly where my home is too. And it's another Colorado Plateau place. It's the Slick Rock. It's the rock itself that I think of as my spiritual home. The Navajo sandstone domes, the Wingate cliffs. You know, I love the Great Basin. I love the Rockies, but I feel most at home in southern Utah, in that Slick Rock country. So I wanted to have you all who are talking about rivers kind of make the next jump and talk about how the rivers really directly inform your writing. You know, Becca, you wrote 20 years ago in There's This River, Krista Sadler's book of Grand Canyon boatman stories, that you could feel the yearly rhythm of river running after you could feel it 20 years after you last worked as a guide. And now 20 years after that, I wonder if you can still feel, as you put it, that shift in your cells in spring, when blood runs higher than water. The river calls us to get back to it, to jump in, to hold on. And in autumn, the end of the guiding season, a restless time. It sounds like that experience was just going to program you forever. I know you spent many years working as a watershed scientist, and you still obviously write about rivers. Do those rhythms stay with you forever? Has the river permanently tuned you to the rhythms of the earth? And are those rhythms the rhythms of your writing?
What a great question. And gosh, I haven't thought about it like that in a while. So maybe I have to say that I remember what it felt like at first, not responding to the call, just saying, I'm not going, I'm not going. I just can't get in my car with 2 black bags and make a life of that anymore. I remember that when that happened and I said, I'm not going, it was like, hold me back, just tie me up. But I felt it was necessary at the time. And then I'd say for a decade, it called as strongly, and to jump on. And it's not like I didn't respond at all. It's just that I didn't go immerse myself for 6 months living out of my car type of thing. It was more like, okay, I'll go do some trips with friends and then write about it, it was making the transition to writer. So the seasons I was feeling, I was feeling them, but I was feeling them in a different way, you know. I was doing something else with the material, so to speak, you know. It wasn't rowing and pointing and talking and cooking, and I was bringing it all in and processing it in a different way. So yeah, I'd say the rhythms are there. Even here in California where we don't have seasons, you know. So, I mean, we completely do, but they're so subtle, but still strong in the blood. Yeah. So yes and no is the answer. I think.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, Michael, I know you worked as a river guide too. You were haunted by waters as well. And you wrote this great little passage at the end of your collection, What the River Knows, where you pretty much give the rivers credit for turning you into an essayist. You write, I no longer believe essays, a purling, fluid, highly excursive form, became my passion and strength by coincidence. Their paragraphs digress like coils or may even switch channels to always return to the overall course of an argument or a theme. I probably should have let you read that. Do you think rivers are ever going to grow stale as a source of inspiration for you?
They will not. They do not. Even though I was a backpacker and hiker before I became a river person, the rivers have their own magic attraction that, I mean, there's a reason why rivers are one of the most powerful metaphors that we know of for existence, human and non-human existence, animal life existence, plant life existence, to the point where the river as a metaphor for existence almost has become a cliche. The river of life, the waters of life, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, we perceive rivers as linear most of the time. And as river guides, we have a problem that we only get to see certain stretches of the river much of the time, the ones that people pay to take us up, to take them out to see. So mostly, especially scenic stretches or the ones that are spiked with whitewater. However, the river is really, if you think about it and read about it and live on it long enough, is a circular thing. It always comes back to the source by way of the water cycle with evaporation. And to me, that is the real powerful metaphor that shows how we actually live our lives directed by this linear thinking, whereas there's these much larger cycles that we're part on. And the river, you know, Heraclit said, you can't step into the same river twice. Well, you can in a way, and you can't. Those statements are both true. But what I still is on my list, to answer your question in the short form, do I ever get tired of rivers? No, I don't. And what I have never done, and what is still on big high on my to-do list, is to walk a river actually from the source to its end in the ocean. I have not done this, and I feel that for a full understanding of the cyclical nature of rivers, and also to see the parts that are normally not seen by river guides and adventurers, I'll have to do that.
Well, Zak, you've done that. You haven't walked the whole length of the Green in Colorado, but you've paddled them all the way from headwaters to the ocean. Tell us a little bit about your centering rivers in your writing.
Yeah, I mean, that Source to Sea trip I did in 2011 that you're referring to is very formative for my career as a writer. My friend and I spent 4 months going from the Wind River Mountains at the source of the Green River down to where the Colorado dries up at the U.S.-Mexico border, and then walked down to the Gulf of California. And exactly as Michael is saying, it was, I'd grown up running rivers, mostly on those scenic sections that, people were willing to make a trip for. And seeing how those sections, which there are many on the Green and Colorado rivers, are connected to the very industrialized lower Colorado River, and made me interested in trying to tell the story of the Colorado from more of a journalistic perspective, which is what I did afterwards. And it was just so powerful to start on the little creek in the Wind River Mountains of the Green River in a pack raft and see the river get bigger and bigger and turn into the Green River and switch into kayaks and spend months following the river down into Utah and across Lake Powell and through the Grand Canyon. And then after the Hoover Dam, see the reverse process happen from all of our many needs for water in the Southwest, where there were canals and siphons and pipelines going away from the river, shrinking it back down into a little creek, and then having it dry up completely. And I think that's maybe the rhythm of the river season. I definitely relate to Becca's statement there, but it was also that cycle of both the natural river starting to grow and carve through these powerful places, and then seeing the river disappear that has stuck with me for over 10 years now, as I've tried to tell the story of different rivers from that bigger perspective of not just what's in the beautiful canyon, but kind of how that river connects to human and other stories beyond the after the takeout and before the put in, so to speak.
After the Takeout's a good title for a book.
There you go.
So Brooke, you've written, we need massive infusions of imagination and creativity and courage to make quantum scale systemic changes in how we make things and how we fuel our desperate lives, and that our own collective wildness is the key. And in your new book, which conveniently you posted on your website, so I had a chance to look at it, Encountering Dragonfly, you write, encountering dragonflies has often created an opening between my conscious and unconscious worlds. So it seems like you're onto something here about the importance of nature in our lives, the importance of these connections to wildness for our very survival. Tell us more about these big ideas and how you can connect them to an encounter with a single dragonfly rather than a whole river basin.
I think you're muted there, Brooke.
Anyway, how the inner and outer are connected, and how the microcosm and the macrocosm are the same. And with dragonflies, and I'm sure it applies to like anything that we really got passionate about, but what I've been able to do, or what I've been required to do, is discover this whole other realm, which, until like 800 AD was sort of commonplace, this imaginal realm that we live in. And I've discovered this whole new idea called imaginal ecology, which is sort of helped me explain my obsession with dragonflies, which began in 2 decades ago with a dream in which a dragonfly appeared. And then soon after, within half an hour, I was seeing them everywhere. And I've kept track over the years of those encounters, and I've tried to figure out what really happened. And this idea of the imaginal realm, imaginal ecology, to me takes ecology, which I'm really excited about. I've called myself an amateur naturalist for most of my life. And suddenly dragonflies were insects, of the order Insecta, and they had these different traits and characteristics and flight patterns and flight seasons and different habitats. But then they also took on their symbolic and archetypal nature. And now I feel like it's a more complete relationship that I have with them. I also realized that until like 800 or whenever, the whole idea of modernity really changed a lot of things for us. And the subtitle of my book, which is Notes on the Practice of Reenchantment, I've been thinking seriously about this because they say Einstein said it, but it may be apocryphal, that we can't solve the problems with the same consciousness that we cause them with. And I think that's one of our big problems in society nowadays, is that we have all these problems, and because of our consciousness, and we think that we can think our way through them all, we just simply do damage control, one solution leading to a bigger problem in the future. So I've decided that my work from here on out is to re-enchant the world, which sounds like a big undertaking, and it probably is. But as soon as I committed to that, I've been really excited about it, because it seems to be something that people are interested in. But re-enchantment, for instance, is the commodification. Disenchantment sort of happened with the commodification of nature, where at some point, who knows when, but with modernity, we realized that we couldn't cut down entire forests of trees to make forts and temples as long as there were tree spirits living in them. So I've sort of taken that and extrapolated it to the present moment, which is carbon. We have this commodification of carbon, which the burning of which is causing us the biggest problem that our species may have ever faced. And if it indeed has its roots in the disenchantment of the world, then wouldn't re-enchantment be part of the solution? So I credit my obsession with dragonflies and that original dream with me thinking about this, and it's my story, and I'm sticking to it for the rest of my life. So
that's very cool. Dragonflies are great. Since we're kind of talking about what to do with the world that is changing so fast, I wanted to go back to Becca. In a 2015 interview, you said, "I'm taking a break from exhausting myself on battles that don't miss me, and I'm pouring myself into a life of authenticity." I don't think you were trying to write poetry, but that rhymes when I read it aloud. That seems like great advice at this fraught moment in America. Can you tell us more? This is purely selfish on my part, because I need help. And I also read your love letter to America on terrain.org, so you might be able to tuck that into your answer too.
Thank you. Gosh, you're doing some archaeology here, Steve. 2015. I worked pretty much my whole professional life in the nonprofit realm. And I know we have a lot of nonprofit experience amongst the panelists as well. And it's hard work, very idealistic, not always all that great paying, or it can be a struggle. And so I was pretty worn out. I had just spent 14 years working in my home watershed, where we used to have a very healthy steelhead run. And in fact, the New Zealand steelhead were brought from Sonoma Valley to New Zealand, and there's a world-class run there now, and we have no fish because we have no water. And so this is going on everywhere. And so, I was disillusioned, worn out. It was, just worn out. And I wanted to, so I stopped that. And I wanted to see if I could just get my energy back to bring back to the fight, I guess you would say, because I didn't have anything left. So authenticity, yes, I think it goes to another topic we're talking about tonight, which is, what do we bring to our work that can make a difference? And I think if it isn't authentic, if it isn't from the heart, not only will we wear ourselves out,
so we find a lot of sustenance outdoors. Obviously, we're all drawn to nature. It seems like that's what you were writing about in that letter to America.
Yeah. Did you want?
Could you read that little bit to us and tell us,
Yeah, I would
put it
love
in
to.
context?
Thank you so much for reading that and for responding to it. the letter to America, you know, I'd been writing op-eds like crazy before the election about the, you know, gendered way people vote. And in every op-ed I sent out got no response. Then I put all the ideas together into this letter to America, and train.org was kind enough to run it. And so I'm telling America, I want you to know I see you. As sea levels rise and cancers rise, I see the beauty of your being. And in your own wise way, you're laying down carpets of autumn leaves each November, election year or not. Your gentle rains that end big wildfires. Your grace in trying to slow massive hurricanes before they make landfall. Your determined help in my healing and the healing of others. You see us too.
That's great. Thank you. So the one way to introduce us would have been to say, four boomers and a millennial walk into a bar. At least we know what we all came out with. We came out with a tall stack of books. So I'm really interested in your commentary about generational bias in Life After Deadpool, Zak. You know, as the millennial member of this panel, you realized you had a different view of Glen Canyon than all of us boomers, or even Gen Xers like Ellen Meloy. So can you tell us more and how that generational difference plays out in your work and your advocacy? You know, are you aware of feeling different about those things than the older folks that you might be working with?
That's a good question. I wrote that passage in Life After Deadpool, kind of thinking about the different ways that the generations of writers have approached Canyon. There's the generation that was around to see Glen Canyon and write about it before the Glen Canyon Dam was built, like Wallace Stegner and Edward Abbey and Katie Lee and many others who wrote great books about what was lost under Lake Powell. And then Ellen Meloy talked in the 90s about, she went out to Lake Powell with Ken Slight, who had obviously seen Glen Canyon before the dam and knew it very well. And her and another historian who's written about Glen Canyon, Jared Farmer, were talking about, as the kind of more Gen X generation, they weren't around to see Glen Canyon before the dam, and they'd always known it as a place that was lost and destroyed. And it's a different approach to, when you come to thinking about Glen Canyon, it's obviously different to have seen it firsthand and loved it as a river than to have just heard the stories and kind of been more. The battle was lost by the time that they were around to come into the fight, I guess. And then the new generation, which isn't an age generation, but just the time that we're all living in now, is that Glen Canyon is coming back on its own. And I don't know if that's specific to millennials or Gen Z or anyone else, but and I'll go out there and see these canyons that have sprung back to life since they were last covered with water in 2000. Lake Powell hasn't been full since 1999, and there's an incredible ecological rebirth happening all across the greater Glen Canyon area, where there are 60-foot tall cottonwood trees that have come back in these side canyons, and beavers building dams supporting these giant groves of willow. And that's what got me excited about writing the book Life After Deadpool, because I think Michael mentioned earlier that if you get to know a place well, there's often a lot of heartbreak involved, because most of the changes we see on the landscape over years or decades is negative change, in most cases, and that's a sad reality of the world we're living in. But it's not the case in Glen Canyon, where even just in the span of the few years I was writing this book, I'd go to the same place and see just this this resurrection happening before my eyes, with more native species out competing the invasive species, and sediment that had choked different parts of these side canyons washing away in a few monsoon cycles. And it was probably the first time in my life I've had that experience of being able to return to a place over and over again, and all the changes being positive, environmentally speaking, of effects of Lake Powell slowly washing away, and the nature taking its course to reclaim a landscape that wasn't available to it when it was under jet boats and houseboats 25 years ago. So
I think that's the lovely part of just being alive at this particular moment in Glen Canyon. I think it's really interesting that we've already referenced Ed Abbey a couple of times. Desert Solitaire was certainly important to me. I read it when I was in college, just 2 years after it was published. And 2 years after that, I was working as a park ranger at Arches, which I thought was pretty cool. We all are inheritors of earlier writers, earlier activists. Michael, your writing often gets compared to Ed Abbey's. It shows up a lot in the blurbs on the back of your books. What does that mean to you?
It's stylistic to a degree, because I try to infuse my writing with humor, because I think a lot of these issues that we address are such bitter pills to swallow that they wouldn't go down otherwise, or it's easy to get on your chair and turn preachy. And so humor is a good antidote for that. And as Ellen Meloy knew too, she used to be called the philosopher clown. But it's also like working on the same ground that these predecessors worked, and then not mincing words, for example. I think that's another thing that, we do mince words. I take that back. Just as an example, I realized a while ago that you can talk about the climate, and each word that you use in this context actually can be arranged on a curve. You can start by the relative milquetoast climate change, which is something always has happened, and go on to global warming, which is still fairly benign. And then you go to global heating. From there, you go to climate crisis. And then the next step up is climate breakdown. So it really matters the words that you use. Of course, we know all this, that the words matter. The words are who we are. And so by maybe using strong language and frank language, maybe that's another parallel that some people see in my writing that connects them to Abby's writing. I hope I'm a little more open-minded when it comes to ethnic minorities, or soon to be majorities, and also the role of women, which was actually, I had a hard time. I tried to find some balance when I tried to organize this panel and pull that together, and I had a hard time. I would have liked to have had a Native person on the panel, and also struggled to find a female writer. So.
Well, you did, of course. Zak wrote about Abby's attitudes toward immigration in his book on Glen Canyon. And Becca, obviously Abby had complicated relationships with women, both in life and on the page. How do you feel about his writing these days? And you are the only woman on this panel, so you get the soapbox for that part.
Yes, and I got to take Ed on a trip down Cataract in 73 or 4. And he got on my boat. He said, "I want to ride with you." And he was great. I mean, he very curmudgeonly, and he had something going on that wasn't ethically appropriate. I didn't. Okay, back to the question. I hate his attitude towards women, and I hated the way he was acting towards women on that trip. How I feel about his writing now, I take the good with the bad, and I got into it with him, back then, especially if men were being sexist on trips, I would react not very tactfully, and got pretty tough, you know. So, did I answer your question?
Well, do you have anything else to say about being a woman who writes about landscape? Because there are more men who get published writing about landscape, certainly, than women. I'm not sure there are more
Is
men
that
writing
true?
about landscape.
You know, I think that women are the landscape. You know, it's like I think David Hinton, the Buddhist translator of Chinese texts, said it best about how what a sleight of hand it is that men have put women in a, you know, one down position when we're the creators. You know, it's like, who did this? Who made this happen? And because there's so much anger about our creative power. And, you know, the abortion thing now, it's all about power. It's all about control. And how do I control this creative thing I can't do, you know? And I was thinking about that today as I was getting ready for this. I was thinking, you know, I didn't ask to be born a woman I didn't ask to be able to, you know, have the role of carrying a child. It's just how I was born. And I think that how I feel about it is I feel like I've never really had an equal voice in anything I've done, including writing. And that's been a really big, shocking revelation of being alive. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my.
But I'm not bitter. I mean,
Yeah.
which is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Because I think I have been more bitter in the past, and I just kind of went, you know what? When they say life isn't fair, they really do mean it. You know, stuff happens. And so, but the best thing about being a writer is the writing. And so,
Yeah, you got to love the process.
yeah, you gotta love it. Yeah.
Case, I saw a few questions coming through. Did you want to throw out any questions to us that you think are relevant to the place we're in now in the conversation?
No, I mean, first off, I mean, we've got about 10 minutes left.
Well, we can keep going.
What's that? Sorry.
We could certainly keep going.
Yeah, well, Stephen, I kind of wanted to hear your answers to a couple of these. You know, before we finish out the night, if you wanted to pick one before your next question or so.
Oh my. Well, I spent so much time trying to figure out questions for everybody else that kind of tells you what I'm thinking about. You know, many years ago, I wrote a book called The Geography of Childhood and Why Children Need Wild Places with my writing buddy, Gary Nabhan. And one of my essays in there was trying to talk about how girls connect with nature as opposed to boys when they're little. And I gave it to my wife and some of my dear female friends, and they just savaged me and said, this is written by a guy. And I went back and rewrote it a bunch of times to try to learn more. I think that was like 25 years ago or longer. And I think we have made lots of progress. I mean, Ellen Meloy, Terry Tempest Williams, Robin Kimmerer, there's some major female voices that people do read and pay attention to. And so I think there's a shift. You know, Ed Abbey's kind of grumpiness and misogyny is a little bit less apparent in what people write now about nature and land, I think, especially with our new emphasis on Native people and Native voices like Robin Kimmerer. But, you know, are we all just talking to each other? Are we all just preaching to the choir? Braiding Sweetgrass certainly busted out of the choir, and every once in a while books do that. But we're heading into a pretty dark time, and I think it's going to be really challenging for all of us. It's like Becca was talking about writing op-eds. I was going to ask you, Brooke, you know, you wrote a book about the Escalante, and we're about 6 weeks out from Trump once again eviscerating Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monument, and Bears Ears too, for no reason other than spite. And you have a long history of advocacy on the plateau. What should we do with our skills when the second Trump administration opens its attacks on our homelands? How do we get beyond preaching to the choir? What do you think, Brooke?
You know, that's a really good question. I think about it a lot because I try to write advocacy pieces. I'm not very good at it. Like I really admire people like Zak who have journalist background, who really can approach those subjects in a journalistic way, and also can do it quickly. I cannot do anything quickly. But I also remember 20 years ago being at a conference, and W.S. Merwin, the poet, may he rest in peace, was one of the speakers. And afterwards, he called for questions, and a young man raised his hand and said, "I'm a poet too, but I really want to write a poem that makes a difference. I feel like I'm just writing, but I want to make a difference with my poetry." And W.S. Merwin got a big smile on his face, and he said, "Well, that's unfortunate." And everyone laughed. But he went on to say that all you can do as a poet or any writer is discover that deep place inside you that is telling you what to do. And you tell the story that you were told from your deepest internal self, and that story will make a difference. But if your goal is to make a difference on the front end, it's never going to work. So I feel like our job is to really get to the essence of, maybe even it's into our collective unconscious, where our entire evolutionary history is stored, and write from that place, because evolution is where we are right now. And evolution, as we all know, is not really improvement, but it's adapting to changing conditions. And if these aren't changing conditions that we're facing, I don't know what are. So I think that's the only thing we can really do effectively.
That's very much like the authenticity that Becca was talking about.
Yeah.
So I suspect Case wants us to move toward finishing, because I don't think we can go too much longer than an hour. So I've got a final question for all of you, and I'll answer it too. Think about this as I go through this. Please tell us about a moment, a special experience with wildness that you remember as powerful or startling or sweet. Also, tell us about how that moment surfaced in your writing, or how you plan to use it in coming work. So I'd written that question, and then this morning an email from Orion Magazine popped up in my inbox with an interview with Robert Redford in conversation with his grandson, Connor Schlosser. And Connor asked Redford, "I feel like you always ask people what the story is and encourage them to tell their story, especially when you're mentoring filmmakers. Can you say more about that?" And Redford answered, "Yes, what's the story? Always, it is always about the story. That's usually what brings people to the work. They have a story they want to tell. A lot of people are taken aback with that question. What's your story?" So, y'all, what's your story? What's your next story? And if you can tie it to a little story about where it came from, that'd be great. Zak, why don't you start?
Well, I'm going to give a there's been many powerful experiences in wild places, and there's been many that I experienced in Glen Canyon while writing this last book. But I think going to the discussion about Edward Abbey and kind of the environmental writing, one of the revelations that happened to me while working on Life After Deadpool was to realize that I'd been a little bit misled about what the history of the Bureau of Reclamation was, and hadn't been told, why it became so powerful to build all these dams across the West. And I tried to address that history a little bit in the book, to talk about, why the New Deal, where the Bureau of Reclamation really came into its own and provided all this public power across the West and united people against fascism in the 30s and 40s, was such an effective political force. And I won't go on too much about that, but I think if I'm for the next project going forward, I want to explore that more, to not just dig into the powerful experiences we can have in nature, but see how in our own political history, not too long ago in this country, we were unified around a common cause that made a lot of mistakes along the way, like the Glen Canyon Dam, but was able to really provide a story and a message that connected with people and got them working towards a common goal, at least to a much greater extent than we have right now. So go New Deal is what I say for my future writing.
I hope it works out for all of us. Michael.
A key moment, or actually a series of key moments on my Arctic traverse, was a little ritual that I developed. And it may sound a little woo-woo, and for people who know me, that's normally not who I am, but I got into the habit after breaking my camp every morning to quietly take a minute and thank the place where I pitched the tent, that part of the land, for keeping me safe overnight. Because I was aware that that was a privilege I had been granted. There's a lot that can go wrong out there with bears and whatnot. And so I felt like a hand had been held over me and protected. And a moment related to that was on the Hula Hula River, where I got attacked to a bear. It was the closest I've ever come to buying the farm. And I don't know to this day how I survived, just by the grace of that bear that decided she did not need to maul me in order to protect her cubs. And like with these places that I spent nights at during my traverse, I often think about that particular bear, what she might be doing, how her life is going out there. And it reminds me of the fact that whether we're there in our minds or not, these places and these beings are out there living self-willed lives. And to a degree, they will be doing fine without us, better than we do without them. And all it really takes is for us to largely leave them alone and not to bring our agendas into them and try to shape them according to our agendas. As far as the stories ahead of me, I'm currently working. I found that as I age, the older I get, the more I'm drawn to history as a way to see how my particular story braids into the larger story. And so my next project that I'm currently putting finishing touches on actually is a book about Nome, which I openly dare anybody to find me calling it the most storied city, at least the most storied city in Alaska that I've ever lived in. And in that particular project, I'm trying to pull together native ways of storytelling, means my experience in anthropology with my interest, my passion in history, and weave a little bit of my own story from my years that I lived in Nome into the whole mix. So the big picture stuff. I'm, like I say, the closer it gets to closing time for me, the more I'm interested in the big picture and what it was all about and how my particular story fit into that.
That's great. We look forward to that one. Becca.
You know, I want to respond with a poem I wrote yesterday. And I think it'll take just a minute. It's called Simple Lives. 1. When I go to the creek to look for rocks, I know I must go alone. Anyone with me would say, "You're a geologist. What type of rock is this? How was it made?" The usual answers, Latin names, mineral formulas, imply their lives are simple. So I slip down muddy creek banks in late fall when no one sees me, but a kingfisher on a bare branch. 2. None of it has left my memory. Basalt, Swiss cheese bubbles of bursting hot gases, welded tough, hot airborne bits bedded and fused, rhyolite, fiery pink minerals stretched into stripes soft as butter. To forget these things is to fail my family. So much schooling, endless cups of coffee. Late nights at the lab, facts run in loops like old movies, my heart asleep. The winter rains still to come. 3, one rare day, I walked the rock bars with my father, who said, "We gave you a good education." He admired the dull red stones when I said, "Those are brick fragments worn by time." 4, rocks move so slowly they pass for dead, loath to let go. They too become dust in the end, like my father's ashes and bits of bone borne to a creek bed, so he could mix with the steelhead gravels of home. This is where I'm going with my writing now.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you for allowing me.
Brooke.
When you said a moment, an encounter, there's only one, and it happened in July. I was with my dog Winslow the week before he died. He couldn't walk, so I carried him in a little grocery bag, and we went down to the river where we always have gone many times every summer, maybe once a week some summers. And it's the place where Castle Valley residents sometimes have picnics. It's a really popular place. We call it Peach Beach. And we'd walk down the trail. It's a couple hundred yards, cross through the wash. And it's a place I often see dragonflies, and this was no exception. I saw 2 dragonflies sort of lit up in the setting sun. And immediately after, a mountain lion leaped in front of me, maybe 10 feet away. It's as close as I've ever been. It's only the 3rd sighting I've ever had of a mountain lion in the wild. And it was only 10 feet away. I don't know why it was lounging or leaping in front of me, bounding in front of me, but it was a really important moment. And since then, I've written extensively about it. I'm not sure what will happen to it, but I've thought about it in terms of the whole imaginal ecology of it, trying to figure out what the ecology of a mountain lion would do to inspire it to be like that, but also what symbolic and archetypal significance it had to me. And it will be one of those encounters that, marked a key moment in my life. So that was it.
I'm deeply envious. I have dreams about seeing mountain lions out there, and I have yet to see one. I thought about moments I've been having out in the Great Basin. I'm working on a new edition of my Great Basin book, The Sagebrush Ocean, that will be the 35th anniversary edition, which is crazy. And so I go out and take new pictures and write in my journal and glory in being the only person for miles and miles. That's one place where you can still just have a sense of just ultimate solitude and wildness. Being up on the table on Mount Moriah amongst the bristlecones at sunset for a supermoon is such a privilege. And being in the middle of a huge basin like Monitor Valley and trying to capture what that space feels like in words and photographs. That's the story that I'm trying to tell, and trying to tell it in a way that is just as meaningful as it was 35 years ago, and also acknowledges the enormous change that landscape has seen as cheatgrass has replaced sagebrush, and climate change has begun to move around the puzzle pieces of all those plant communities and their animals who live there. So right now, that's my story. And I think that we all have so many stories that we could have told tonight that I wish we could go for 2 hours, but I don't think we can. And it's a little after 7. So Case, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. I mean, what a group of luminaries we were able to talk to tonight. I'm thankful from Utah Humanities. Thank you, Stephen, so much for such a narrative-based conversation. It was lovely, directed, poignant. Thank you again. I mean, I can't thank you enough. Thank you, Michael, for getting this together. Thank you all for being here. And thank you from Utah Humanities in the Wild. As noted before, this will be uploaded to YouTube early next week, and you will be able to watch it again and again and again. With that, it will have links to all authors' web pages, their books, all the things, wonderful things that they do. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you all again. I hope to see all of you soon. Have a great evening.
Thanks to you all.
Thanks, Case. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.